Good morning. I'm Ronnie, and welcome to another segment of Freedom Unshackled, the podcast. Today's segment, we're going to discuss the silencing of women's voices in a males dominated movement. There's something happening inside the criminal justice reform movement that we don't talk about enough. We talk about justice, we talk about reform, we talk about second chances, we talk about fairness. But even inside this movement, formerly incarcerated and incarcerated women remain one of the most overlooked populations. Women are still fighting to be heard. We are still fighting to be centered. We are still fighting to have our lived experience treated as expertise. This conversation, I want to be clear, is not about division. This conversation is about the truth. Because a movement that claims justice must also practice justice internally. We must examine who is centered, who is funded, who is invited to speak, who is treated as leadership, and who is treated as an afterthought. Formerly incarcerated women are not an add-on to the criminal justice reform conversation. We are central to this conversation. We are central to understanding the harm. We are central to understanding the solutions. We are central to understanding what real reform must look like. Yet far too often, women remain the forgotten population. Recently, I attended a mass rally where organizations came together to advocate for legislation and policy reform affecting incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. It was an important gathering. People showed up committed to change. People showed up committed to justice. But something happened that reminded me exactly why this conversation is necessary. The opening speaker spoke for an extended period of time. The next speaker spoke for about 10 minutes. Another speaker spoke so long that it felt like a full presentation. Like, honestly, I thought he was going to pull out PowerPoints. It was kind of long. And then, when it's time for the first formerly incarcerated woman to speak, myself, I was quietly told to limit my remarks to 30 seconds. 30 seconds. After several formerly incarcerated men were given an opportunity to fully articulate their concerns, the first formerly incarcerated woman was told 30 seconds. 30 seconds is not enough time to speak about trauma. 30 seconds is not enough time to speak about sexual abuse. 30 seconds is not enough time to speak about barriers to housing. 30 seconds is certainly not enough time to speak about the challenges women face when returning home. 30 seconds is not enough time to speak about systemic inequalities that impact women differently than men. I, being Ronnie, chose not to comply with that limitation. I spoke for about 4 minutes. Because sometimes silence is complacence. And sometimes speaking longer than you are told is necessary. Silence does not always look like someone telling you not to speak. It could look like someone limiting your time. It could look like controlling the microphone. Silence sometimes looks like deciding whose issues are treated as urgent. Control of time is control of the narrative. So let's be more cognizant when we're in these spaces of elevating and respecting the voices of those women who are present and who have the same lived experience of being incarcerated, being on account, getting packages, being strip searched, having a DIN number, just like our male counterparts. So we're going to now kind of like shift focus, and we're going to talk about disparities in programming for women. When we examine reentry programming for women, the disparities are very clear. In New York State, through the OASIS licensed residential programs, for approximately every 25 beds available for men, there are approximately 5 beds available for women. That ratio tells a significant story. It tells us who is prioritized. It tells us who is centered. It tells us who is treated as an afterthought. Too often, programming for women is simply programming designed for men with minimal adjustments. Let's say they're like male programs with skirts put on them. Women experience incarceration differently. Women have higher rates of prior sexual trauma. Women often return home with responsibilities for children. Women face stigma connected to motherhood. Women face barriers related to reunification with families. Women face housing instability at higher rates than our male counterparts. Women face economic barriers at higher rates. Women face health challenges connected to trauma. Programs designed for men do not address these realities. When programming is not designed with women in mind, women struggle to succeed. When women struggle to succeed, the system blames the individual instead of examining the structure. Funding priorities reveal value priorities. And right now, women are still being treated as an afterthought. There are women whose voices we hear consistently from in this movement. And I want to acknowledge them because the work that they have done has been powerful, necessary, and often carried out at great personal cost. We hear from Serena from New Hour. We hear from Donna from A Little Piece of Light. We hear from Roz from Rap. We hear from Vanessa from Rap. We hear from Laura from Rap. We hear from Judy from Rap. We hear from Tracy from Vocal New York. And you hear from me. All of us have stepped forward and have spoken in truth in rooms that were not always welcoming. We have shared painful lived experience publicly so that systems could be challenged. We have testified before legislators. We have organized communities. We have pushed for policy reform. We have shown up again and again. We have carried the responsibility of making sure that the experiences of formerly incarcerated women and incarcerated women are not completely ignored. And that work deserves recognition. But here is the issue. We cannot continue to rely on the same small group of formerly incarcerated women to represent the experiences of all formerly incarcerated and incarcerated women across New York State. There are many more voices. There are women who have experienced sexual abuse inside facilities. There are women who have experienced trauma under community supervision. There are women who have struggled to access safe housing. There are women who have struggled to reunify with their children. There are women who have struggled to access health care. There are women who have struggled to find employment. There are women who are still trying to stabilize their lives after release. And many of these women are not yet in advocacy spaces. Some women do not feel invited. They don't feel safe. And some don't feel ready. Some women may not yet know that their lived experience is valuable to policy conversations. Let me say that again. Some women may not know that what they have to share is so valuable to policy conversations. Some women may feel intimidated entering spaces that are male-dominated. Some women may not see themselves reflected in leadership positions. And we must do better at inviting women into this work. We must create pathways that make participation accessible. We must mentor women who want to speak but do not yet know where to begin. They haven't found their voices. Now I want to say something very clearly about our brothers in the movement. We appreciate solidarity, no doubt. We appreciate when men use their platforms to highlight issues affecting women. We appreciate that partnership. But speaking up for women is not the same as speaking for women. Those are two very different things. We need men to stand with us. We do not need men to replace us. We need support that amplifies our voices. We do not need support that speaks in place of our voices. We need solidarity that centers women. We do not need solidarity that sidelines us. This movement is stronger when women are fully included. This movement is more effective when women are fully heard. This movement is more honest when women are fully represented. We must expand that circle. We cannot continue to operate in silos. There has to be synergy. We must bring more formerly incarcerated women into advocacy spaces. We must create an environment where women feel welcome, respected, and encouraged to lead. Because the experiences of formerly incarcerated women are not identical. They are not interchangeable. They are diverse, complex, and necessary for understanding the full picture of what reform must address. If we want real change, then the people most impacted must be centered, and that includes formerly and incarcerated women. Our voices are not optional, our voices are essential. Now, when we talk about all the violence and what's happening inside correctional facilities, we oftentimes leave out another part of the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision because we forget about it. We forget about this part, and that is parole. For many women, vulnerability does not end at release. Power imbalance does not end at release. Fear does not end at release. Dependence on authority figures does not end at release. There are documented cases where parole officers have abused their power. One example involves a parole officer here in Albany, New York, who was accused of sexually assaulting a woman under his supervision and ultimately received a sentence connected to misconduct. That case reminds us that vulnerability can continue even after release. Women on parole often must navigate a difficult reality, report misconduct and risk consequences, remain silent and carry harm alone. True reform must include examination of community supervision structures because safety must exist both inside and outside facility walls. And imagine being a woman who lives alone and your parole officer comes to visit you at 8, 9 o'clock at night. You're in a very vulnerable situation with that man in your home. And you want to keep your freedom. And he sexually assaults you. What do you do? So I think we need to include in some of our advocacy what happens to individuals while on parole. So I guess, we need to tap into what's happening also inside these women facilities. Recent reports have raised serious concerns about deaths at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. Multiple women died within a short period, including deaths reported as suicides. These deaths raise questions about mental health care, medical care, isolation, and institutional accountability. When women feel unheard, mental health deteriorates. When women feel unsupported, harm escalates. If concerning conditions are being reported at Bedford Hills, We must also ask questions about Albion Correctional Facility. Albion has long been associated with allegations of sexual abuse and misconduct involving staff. Albion has a reputation among advocates as a facility where violence against women's bodies have been reported. Civil lawsuits have alleged patterns of abuse. Cases have involved correctional officers accused of misconduct. There are long-standing concerns about whether women feel safe reporting abuse in Albion. When institutions lack accountability, harm can continue unchecked. Silence protects institution. Voices protect people. And let's be really clear here right now. All of these horrific things, from the murders to the rapes to the brutality to the physical violence to the emotional violence to the suicides to the mental health crises, are all being done under Commissioner Monticello. Every bit of this is being done under Commissioner Monticello. And I cannot stress any more than I've already had in several different spaces. But that man needs to go. And Governor Hochul, you need to take a look at what's happening in these facilities and wake up and realize that this man, Monticello, must go. And so, thinking about what's happening, how can we fix it? And how we can fix some of this is through legislation, right? There are current legislative efforts in New York that directly relate to the issues that we are discussing today, particularly when it comes to sexual abuse, accountability, and oversight inside correctional settings. One of those bills is Senate Bill S429. Introduced by Senator Julia Salazar, along with co-sponsors including Senator Burke, Senator Fahey, Senator Webb, and a host of others. That Senate Bill S429, would amend the executive law to specifically authorize the New York State Inspector General to receive and investigate complaints of sexual assault occurring inside facilities operated by the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision. What this bill does is extremely important. It creates a pathway for incarcerated individuals to report sexual assault outside of facility chain of command. Ronnie, why does that even matter? Because many incarcerated women do not feel safe reporting abuse internally. When a woman reports abuse inside a facility, that report often goes through the same system that employs a person accused of misconduct. Women may fear retaliation. Women may fear being placed in solitary confinement. Women may fear being labeled as a problem. They fear not being believed. They fear losing program opportunities. They may even be fearful of being transferred. And they feel disciplinary consequences. And just to give you an example of this, when I was in Albion, we had the deputy of security side and we had officer side in M Block. How in the world would I put in any kind of grievance or anything against officer side to his brother? Do you know what would happen to me if I did something like that? Because Dep side was not to be played with. Do you understand the consequences that would happen to somebody who tried to write up officer side? Because we're all clear on how the nepotism runs throughout docks. That's another thing that they need to look up. They need to break up these family affairs that are going on in the Department of Corrections, because it is challenging to have to try to write up somebody and that you know that write-up is going to end up with their family member. their mother, their father, their sister, their wives, their husbands. It's insane. Senate Bill S-429 will require the Inspector General to create confidential and secure systems for reporting sexual assault. It will require clear procedures for investigation. It would require protections against retaliation. It would create another layer of accountability that does not rely solely on the internal structure of the Department of Corrections and community supervisions. How many times do we have to say that they need to stop investigating themselves? For women who have historically reported sexual abuse and felt ignored, this bill could provide a safer pathway to be heard. Another important bill is Senate Bill S-8856, also introduced by Senator Julia Salazar along with Assemblymember Gabriela Romero. Senate Bill S-8856 would require counties across New York State to establish civilian complaint review boards with authority to review allegations of misconduct involving local law enforcement officers and correctional staff working inside county jails. These civilian review boards will be independent bodies that can review complaints, examine internal investigations, and make recommendations regarding disciplinary action, policy reform, or further investigation. What is significant about this bill is that it requires representation from individuals with lived experience, including formerly incarcerated individuals. That matters. Because lived experience provides insight that policy alone cannot. These review boards would have the authority to review patterns of misconduct. They would have the authority to examine whether investigations were conducted properly. They would have the authority to recommend changes in policy. They would have the authority to increase transparency. For women who have experienced sexual harassment, sexual abuse, coercion, or misconduct inside county facilities, independent review boards create an additional layer of accountability. These bills represent acknowledgement that internal oversight mechanisms alone are not always sufficient. Again, they can't keep investigating themselves. When abuse is reported internally, women may not feel safe. When investigations remain within the same institutional structure, trust is limited. Independent oversights help create additional protections. Independent oversight help create transparency, create accountability. And we talk about the silencing of women's voices. These bills matter because they create more pathways for women to be heard. Policy reform becomes necessary when systems fail to protect people. Policy reforms become necessary when harm continues without accountability. Policy reforms become necessary when people are afraid to speak. These legislative efforts are steps toward creating structures that recognize the need for transparency, independence, and protection for those who report abuse. For those incarcerated women, oversight is not an abstract policy issue. It is a safety issue, a dignity issue, and a justice issue. Now, how do we get some of this stuff going? We need those voices. We need those women's voices. We need your voices out there with us. I named earlier those of us who are in this on a regular basis. Contact one of us. Contact Serena at New Hour. Contact Donna at A Little Light. Contact Roz and Vanessa at Rap. Contact Tracy at Vocal. Contact me at Freedom Unshackle, right? Contact us because there are many formerly incarcerated women who can contribute to this movement. We need more women speaking. We need more women organizing. We need more women shaping policies. We need more women to mentor other women. We need more women stepping into leadership roles. Lived experience is expertise. Women's voices strengthen reform efforts. Our voices improve policy outcomes. Our voices will help ensure that reform efforts are complete and not just a male effort with a skirt on it. Invitation matters, encouragement matters, representation matters. We need to be present. We need to be present. We need to be present at these rallies, these protests, at these legislation days, at anything and everything. We need to be educated. We need to know at these round tables, workshops, seminars. We need to be invited to these spaces. And I hope that someone listening understands the need for the voices of women. Incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women must no longer remain the forgotten population. Justice must include women fully. Reform must include women fully. Accountability must include women fully. When we are centered, policy improves. When women are heard, system changes. When women are included, justice becomes more complete. Our voices matter, and our voices must be heard. And I will not allow us to continue to be forgotten. Thank you for sitting and listening with me a bit today. Hopefully you will share this podcast with others that you know of who can take this and do something with it. Bring us to the table. Bring us to the forefront. Let us talk about our experiences. Let us tell you what happened to us under our dead numbers. This is Ronnie, and thank you for joining the Freedom Unshackled, the podcast.